Boathouse, and we do educational events such as this, Keith Nyitray. So you might observe a donation bar, a donation container, jar, container, as you head out the door, and you're always welcome to contact us at sitkamaritime.org. But we're here to talk about Keith Nyitray and to hear Keith talk about his assault on the Brooks Range. But, you know, Keith and I met in about 2020. We shared some political, we found out that we just shared some political interest. And we first met operating, helping Scott McAdams run for Congress. And so it's been a few years, but Keith and I have plotted on many things in the decades since there. But Keith has kind of a storied and varied history himself. He is a boy from the East Coast. He was born in the Bronx. He came up here after college, like so many of us do. And I'll let him tell how he got involved in starting his trek across the Brooks Range. But in the time since, he's been a successful cabin builder and carpenter. He's been here in Southeastern, a fisherman and a farmer. And of course, we've known him most recently as a successful manager of nonprofits, working previously for the co-op, and now we at the Sitka Heritage Society are very happy that Keith has joined us as our executive director, which is how we have we're able to fit his lecture under our program, and we're happy to do that because we've heard this. Yes. But before we start, I do want to pay certain respects. And stealing liberally from the city of Sitka, let me share what I think is an important statement, a land acknowledgement. We are on the Linkaane land. The Tlingit people have been indigenous to this land for over 10,000 years, living their culture and their tribal values. Good old chish to the Tlingit people. Thank you for letting us be here. So with that, from the Bronx to the Brooks Range, Keith Nyitray.
Thank you, Bruce. I have to admit, I'm a little nervous. I have not done this program in like over 25 years. And about 6 months ago, someone asked me, would I ever do it again? And then a couple of people finally said, okay, I'll do it. And the fact that this is 35 years ago, matter of fact, 35 years ago today, I was leaving the village of Nowatak, Alaska, on my way to Kotzebue. I walked into Kotzebue on January 11th, 35 years ago. But people say, you know, how did this come about? Why did you even think about doing a journey like this? So before I get into the actual journey, just want to give you a little background. That's me, 19 years old, coming up on the Matanuska Ferry to climb Mount McKinley. And my team and I, we walked in to Mount McKinley, where most people fly in. So that was my first long-distance trek. It took us 60 miles to get to base camp and another 12 miles to get to the top of McKinley. There's me at the top of McKinley, 19 years old. It was beautiful. You could see the curve of the earth. I fell in love. All look around, all you saw was nothing by man or anything like that. This was Alaska, and I just fell in love. And my teammates left, and I stayed. I literally stayed up in Alaska, went back in the fall of '79, and then moved back to Alaska in January of 1980. So I've been up here for a little over almost 26 years now. And for the first 4 years or so up here, I was a climber. I spent a lot of years, just 4 years, just hanging around the mountains. I was climbing McKinley, many of the other peaks, Russell, and some of the other peaks in the Alaska Range. But after a while, I did a peak experience called Mount Huntington, and I realized that I had kind of peaked out on my climbing experiences. But right around 1983, the state of Alaska offered homesteads. And I found a place on the western side of Alaska Range, here, right over here on the western side of the northern base of the Revelation Mountains, where I could stake 40 acres of land. But because I was poor, I couldn't fly in all my supplies, so I decided to walk in from Petersburg, from Talkeetna, all the way through to Rainy Pass Lodge, all the way there. I'd spend a month there. A plane load would fly in my supplies. And then towards the end of the summer, I'd build a raft and float all the way down to McGrath. So I was like doing 400 miles every year. And I would be doing this year after year after year. And I also started working at Rainy Pass Lodge as a caretaker. I helped build the Noatak Trail, the Iditarod Trail. But this is when I first got out to my homestead. There's my dog, Smoke. And I want to just point out, he's 4 months old. And he crossed the Alaska Range at 4 months old for the first time. By 1985, I had done a lot of journeys across Alaska, along the range into the Talkeetnas, several trips back and forth across the Alaska Range, different ways. And I was doing these 400-mile trips every year. And one day I was studying a map I was studying to get certified to be a weather observer for Rainy Pass Lodge. And while I was there, I saw a map of Alaska, and I noticed that the Brooks Range was the northern and westernmost extension of the Continental Divide. And you've heard of the Appalachian Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and I wondered, has anyone ever done the Brooks Range? And the answer was no. And that concept of doing it stuck in my mind. And I spent 2.5 years studying those topographic maps that are on the wall, valley by valley, thinking about it, logistics and all that stuff. And I remember the day, it was September 12th, 1986, about 2:30 p.m. I had all those maps on my friend's wall, and there were other maps, including the Yukon. Finally put them all together on the wall, and they're wrapped around 2 walls, and I started at one end, and I went through it, and I went through it, and I went through it, and I stood back and went, I think I can. And my next thought was, oh shit, now I have to try. And at that point, I could see it. And then it took me another year and a bit to get sponsorships, get the equipment. I wrote to all the villages asking permission to come in, and it basically took me 4 years from the conception to actually start the Brooks Range journey. Back then we called it the Trans-Brooks Arctic Expedition. Woo-hoo. Kind of funny, But to me, the idea of exploring the Arctic and going up there and doing something that I could see, that I could visualize, and it wasn't 1,500 miles, it was 5 300-mile trips, back to back to back to back. And I could do 300 miles easy. So on March 6th, my partner Paul Lowe and I flew in to Fort McPherson. And I remember the trip, flying over the Davidson Mountains and the Philip Smiths Mountains in the wintertime. This was in March. And it's just mountains and snow and nothing. And it was mind-boggling. And I remember my partner got really, really silent. He began to realize what the hell we were getting involved in. Well, we flew into Fort McPherson on March 6th. That's Fort McPherson on the Peel River. It was about 20 degrees below zero when we flew in. And we spent a week there. And for the entire week, I talked to a lot of the elders like Edward Itzey. Edward Itzey had been the last native elder, Witch-in elder, to go from Fort McPherson over the mountains on land to Old Crow. And I spent an afternoon with him, and he told me his journey. He described it. Like, well, when you leave here, you go up this creek, and then you want to climb up this bench, and you want to aim for that mountain, but then you want to drop down on the third creek, and he took me all the way through. And he said, I just remember, when you get to Bear Mountain, make a right. And he could, but that's as far as he could tell me. But it was incredible knowledge that he had, and it corresponded. And when I was listening to him, knowing the maps in my head, he transported me to these different landmarks that corresponded to what I had studied. So it was an incredible help. Well, we spent a week there in Fort McPherson, and they would not let us spend any money at all. And we had come there with like $1,000 for hotels and food or whatever. And the villagers would not let us spend any money. So we went to the tribal council, the band council meeting, and we donated $1,000 and created the Chief Julius Scholarship Fund. And they were so excited. We also decided that since we're going this old traditional route between Fort McPherson and Old Crow, that the kids in the elementary school would write letters, and we would carry them from one village to the other. And so on March 13th, we left Fort McPherson about 20 below. The town came out to celebrate us, and I remember the chief, Charlie, he came up and said, "Oh, you're going up the Peel River, down the Peel River, and you're going to go up this place. There's a cabin there of the K's. Could you take this meat grinder to them?" I'm like, "Sure, I'll be a meat grinder." Well, he put out this like 4-foot-long board that's, at 8 inches thick and 12 inches wide, and it weighed like 60 pounds, and he put it on the sled. I'm like, "Okay," and so we're going to go do it and drop it off at the Joseph K. So we leave Fort McPherson. They gave us a 21-gun salute. It was really fun. And we started mushing down the Peel River on the ice road, because a lot of the villagers use that. And eventually we got to John Joseph K. But while we were on this road, Chief Charlie passed us by in a pickup truck and waved at us and met us at John Joseph and Mary Kay's cabin. He did that deliberately to make sure that we would stop and meet them. And we spent a time there talking to them. And again, listening to the stories, their knowledge of the land and their history was so vital to me for the experience of being up there. Well, we eventually left, and we started heading up in towards towards McDougal Pass. And there wasn't much snow, but there was some snow machine trails. But after a while, we went beyond where the villagers from Fort McPherson would go hunting for caribou and things like that. And so we got up there, and this is looking down into the Rat River, heading towards McDougal Pass. And there's a book called The Mad Trapper of Rat River. It was really kind of fun. And we're just, mushing along, having a good time, and just looking down the Rat River as we were approaching McDougal Pass. Well, we got across McDougal Pass and dropped into the Little Bell River, and all the conditions changed. The snow was entirely different. We were on a different side of the mountains. The snows were deeper, and the dogs just couldn't make the road trail. So we had to get out in front of it and snowshoe a trail so the dogs could follow. Well, that was a lot of work. And temperatures were getting warm. Spring breakup that year came a little early. But to advance our team, our 2 dog teams, I would snowshoe 6 miles up, then snowshoe 6 miles back, and then the team would move 6 miles forward. So I was putting up 18 miles a day to advance our camp 6 miles. And my partner at that time was not having any fun. He basically just rode the rails of the dog sled, and I was doing all the work. But we were making progress, and I remember writing in my journal, I could feel myself coming alive more and more each day. Certain senses are reawakening. I hear the slightest of sounds. I have a new farsightedness of smells. My body is toning up. I feel myself growing stronger, more awake, and more aware of my surroundings with each passing day. Well, because we were out there for so long, we encountered various storms along the way that would again slow our progress down. And this one storm came down on the Lower Bell River, and I was there for 3 days. And during this point, my partner said, "I ain't having any fun." And he decided to quit. He said, "This expedition is screwed. We're behind schedule. I'm not having fun. It's a failure. When we get to Old Crow, I quit." But we still had like 100 miles to go to Old Crow, and I had to deal with him. And talk about a classic partnership breakup. You never hear about this, but sometimes we get into fights, and I have to wrap him up and throw him in the snow, and he'd hate and then start crying, and he lost it. I just never saw a classic partnership breakup like that. But even during the hard times, there's always something to look forward to, the beauty of it. And I love this photograph because there are 5 sources of light in it. You have the campfire, the candle lit inside the tent, the moon, the northern lights, and the stars. It was just serene. And for me, it's like, well, my partner's going to quit. We're going to make it all pro, but you know what? I'm up here and I'm enjoying it. I'm having fun. And so we just decided to keep going. Oops, wrong way. We eventually went through a lot of our supplies, and we cut up and burned one dog sled and hooked all our dogs into one long dog team line. 15 dogs in a single file. And the thing about that is, you have to plan your curves way in advance. You can't go a 90-degree corner, because by the time the lead dog gets around the corner, the real dogs are going cutting the hypotenuse. So we'd have to plan these long curves to move through. Well, eventually we made it to the Porcupine River, and oops, let's see. Why is that not going? There we go. And on the Porcupine River, there was a cabin there that we knew we could stay at. And this was an Old Crow band cabin, and we spent a couple of days there. And again, we were finally on the Porcupine River. And one of the things we did is finally inside a cabin, we ate. And I remember this one night, we had a celebratory dinner. And it was a moose roast in mandarin orange, sweet and sour sauce, with Bisquick biscuits, and a pie made with graham cracker crust, with a rice pudding, dried pineapple filling, with crushed Oreo cookies, flake chocolate, mandarin oranges, and almonds on top. But at this point, again, my partner Paul decided he was going to quit. Well, at that point, the weather started really warming up. In the spring of '89, suddenly got really warm in end of March and early April. And so we started to battle overflow, and the river was melting on us. And so we raced into Old Crow. And on the way into racing down the Porcupine River, we stopped at 2 different cabins along the way. And they were expecting us. They knew we were coming. And we spent some time with them. But I spent one time at a cabin with Ken Newcon at Goose Camp. And he was just a really neat elder. He said, "Shitsha, my friend, what are you going to do? Your partner's quitting." And I'm like, "Well, I don't know what I'm going to do." He said, "Come on back, stay with me." And I thought, how cool would that be to live with a native elder through a breakup? So we eventually made it to Old Crow. Quick turnaround. My partner quit. He took 1 dog home with him. I sold food and dogs. I traded dogs because they were new blood. Some of these dogs were Iditarods, sled dogs. And so that was bringing new blood into their dogs team community. And I traded things like that. And I bought batteries because I knew Ken Newcon liked his his tape recorder. And literally the next day I turned around and I raced back up 20 miles, back up the Porcupine River, where we had just come down to go spend time with Ken Newcon. And, oops, wrong way. And this is where I was aiming to, Moose Camp, the Hilton on the Porcupine River. Ken Newcon was a well-known trapper, hunter, elder, and this was his camp. And when I got there, he said, "Shitsha, my friend, Initsu, my goodness, I was hoping and praying you'd make it back in time." Well, the reason why he was so worried about me, because literally several hours after I got there, overflow started flowing down the Porcupine River. And you could just see all this water suddenly, coming down the surface, and a few hours later, the river started to break up. And he said, "Shitsha, my friend, now you're stuck." But to witness the breakup on a major river like that, these are blocks of ice that are 4 and 5 foot thick and 12, 15 feet in diameter, and they're tumbling and they're crushing. You stand on the shore and the ground shakes as the ice just scrapes along the sides of the river. And again, he just said, "Now you're stuck." Well, I was glad to be stuck with this man, Ken Newcon, a highly respected elder. You look at this man, and you notice his left arm is gloved and in his pocket. He suffered polio when he was a young kid. Yet he was considered to be the best trapper and hunter on the Porcupine River. And I lived with him for 6 weeks. And in exchange for my labor hauling in firewood for his winter thing with my team and all that stuff, He taught me his language, Lushu, and told me stories. And he had a grace about him that when we'd go cruising the river looking for caribou, we shot caribou, and there's Ken smoking cigarettes with 15 gallons of gas by his feet. You know? But, you know, we'd shoot caribou, and he'd say, "Merci cho." And in the Lushu language, that's thank you greatly. Merci being a bastardization of merci from the French trappers that were in the Yukon, and cho meaning great. So merci cho, thank you greatly. And we shot several caribou, and he always used to cut his caribou on a tarp on the ground. He was getting old, and his back was hurting, so I built him this cutting table. And we got a caribou, and he started cutting his caribou on the ground again. I'm like, "Ken, how come you're not using the table?" He said, "Shitcha, it's too beautiful, I don't want to get bloody." And I threw the caribou on it and said, "Now it's bloody." You know? We just spent an incredible amount of time there. And we were waiting for the ice to move out and spring to roll around. And while I was there, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? Or just quit. My plan is all shot to hell. But I remembered my research. I had read a book called Two in the Far North by Olaus and by Marty Murie, famous American naturalist. And Olaus and Marty and their son and a guy named Jess Rust went up the Old Crow River by boat to study and ban geese. And they said they got to the headwaters of the Old Crow River. And I thought, if they can do it, so can I. And so I began to formulate a plan to go on. So we eventually went back to Old Crow, oops, wrong way. And this was a really powerful day because I've been out, when I first got to Old Crow in early April, I was in and out so fast. When I came back in June 4th, people asked me, "Have you heard about the Exxon Valdez oil spill?" 1989. So I went to a French cabin to watch TV, and the first thing on that thing was live from Tiananmen Square. And then the photos of Prince William Sound. The blackened beaches, the fires, the protests in Tiananmen Square. This was the civilized world that I was coming back to. And it was shocking, and Ken just shook his head, you know. So I spent several days there in Old Crow. I traded the last of my dogs, except one, Smoke, who I raised from a pup, for more food and supplies, a canoe, and I was getting ready to head up into the Old Crow Basin. The Old Crow Flats is this old Pleistocene-era lake. It's about 80 miles in diameter, and the Old Crow River winds 300 miles through this old lake bed to go 80 miles from its headwaters to its mouth. And this is an aerial photo. I did not take this photograph, but I throw it in there to give you a sense of this old lake bed. And while I was there, some friends said, "Hey, George Moses and Michael and Dennis Frost and their 8-year-old son said, we're going up the Old Crow to shoot some geese. We could take you up there." And I went, "Okay." But they said, "We can only go so far. It's 300 miles, but we'll go as far as you can." And they decided to take me up to Potato Creek. And so for 2 days, and then, you know, and finally they said, "This is as far as you go because we need enough gas to go back to town." So they dumped me off at Potato Creek, and there I was, alone. And when the boat left, and the sound of the engine disappeared around a bend, I remember thinking, I'm really all alone. But to counter that, I immediately just started packing up my thing. I cut poles to pole the canoe. I knew I was going to pole my way up the Old Crow River. And for several weeks, I poled about 180 miles up the Old Crow River. And it was an amazing thing. Keep going the wrong way. I saw, every day I'd see 7, 8 moose, you know, along the way. And they were unafraid. They'd really never seen people before. I saw bears all the time. You know, about every 3 days or so I'd come across a bear. But out in the middle of the river, they're safe. They just huff and shove. But, I mean, these are pretty good sized grizzlies. I also saw lots of wolves along the trip. And this one was just escorting along the thing. There's a story that I don't tell very often. There's footprint. These are big wolves. But I was poling up the river, and the cut banks of the river, there's permafrost underneath it. There's an overhang. And I was poling up the river, and there was a wolf sleeping underneath the cut bank because it's cool. There are no mosquitoes, you know. And I poled right up next to him, about 5 feet off from the shore. And he's just sleeping there. My dog's just watching him. And the wolf woke up, looked at me, whoa! You know, jumped up, tried to scramble on top of the bank, you know, finally got 2 legs up and scrambling, looking over his shoulder, got on top of the bank, went, huh, you didn't see that, and walked off. I mean, they were literally not used to seeing people at all. My camp was very simple. Just a tarp, a mosquito bed net, a ground cloth, and a sleeping bag. And I use the system for a variety of reasons. One, when you take a tent and the tent poles and all that stuff, that's weight. You know, maybe 8, 9 pounds of tent, whereas this only weighs like 2 pounds. That means I can take 8 more pounds of food. But more importantly, I learned from all my previous journeys trekking across Alaska that my survival depended on being aware of all things at all times. And by being in an open air shelter, I could see what was happening. If something rustled in the brush, I could see it. But when you're in a tent, you zip yourself in a man-made world and you disconnect yourself from the very world that you're trying to connect with. So by having an open air shelter, I remained connected. Miles and miles and days, I got to this point, this benchland. And in Two in the Farther, Marty Murray wrote about how they had passed this booming cliff. And just past that, they were able to get on a bank and look around and look over this old Pleistocene ever lake bed. And they figured they were just about at the headwaters of the Old Crow River. Well, I got there, but my map said it was not the headwaters. They did not know, let's see, the Old Crow River went around this way, but right through here is called Ammerman Gap. And beyond that was a huge another basin that the Old Crow River really started into. Now I'm thinking, crap, the Moors did not make it to the headwaters of the Old Crow. But I'll keep on going. And so I kept on going and made it through Ammerman Gap. And this is Ammerman Gap right through here. And before that, I could make like 8, 9 miles a day pulling up the river. But once I got into the gap, I had these little hash marks where I made like 1.5 miles, then only a 1/4 mile, because all the brush and all that stuff. Well, this is where I decided I can't go any further. This is called Yankee Ridge. There's this bulge right here. At the very tip of that bulge, in a stand of 3 spruce trees, about 15 feet off the ground, I have a canoe. Everyone wants to pick up, there's a 5-gallon bucket with food, matches, emergency supplies, and I left that there because I didn't know if I could make it any further, but if I had to turn around, I'd have the canoe and food and supplies to go back to Old Crow. Well, I eventually this is looking down from Yankee Ridge, and in the distance is Bear Mountain, right? That's Bear Mountain. That Edward Itchy said, when you get to Bear Mountain, make a right. That told me go to the north side, don't go to the south side, you know. So at that point, I packed everything up into my pack, and that pack would weigh about 120 to 150 pounds with all my food supplies and all that stuff. And of course I carried a shotgun, because if I did carry a shotgun, the natives would never have talked to me. My dog Smoke also carried his pack. He had about 40 pounds on his pack. And if you heard my interview on Raven Radio the other day, he never figured out that no matter how much food he ate out of his pack, it always stayed at 40 pounds. But yeah, if he had ever figured that out, I probably would be missing fingers or a foot. But I got into the mountains after a long hiking through the tussocks. I finally got up high. You see all these lines. These are all caribou trails from ancient migratory paths. And right here, that is the very start of the Brooks Range in the British Mountains. That is literally right where the Brooks Range begins. And I was following these ancient trails of caribou. It was wonderful to walk on. I mean, you could see line after line after line. It was really amazing. And as I got to Bear Mountain, here's the valley to make a right, right? Well, they don't call it Bear Mountain for any particular reason, because while I was crossing one of the drainages down here, I came across a grizz. And I was already in the brush when I saw her, so I backed up to this hillside, and she had a cub with her, and she started to charge me. This is the first time I've been charged by a bear on this trip. And she kept on charging and charging, and I finally took off my pack, took off Smoke's pack, so he'd be able to fight her and be free. And, you know, jacked in a shotgun shell and slugs into my shotgun, and up, and she's charging and charging. I'm going, whoa, no, I'm not here to hurt you. I'm just passing through, you know. She's charging. She comes up. The effective killing range with a bear, in my experience, with a shotgun, is about 10 to 15 yards at the max, with double-aught buck, blinding shot that slug, 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 slug. And I didn't want to, I'm yelling at her, your adrenaline is flowing through my system. I'm like, damn it, I'm just passing through. If I shoot you, your cub will die. I'm just passing through. Damn it, I claim my rights of passage. And she stopped. I'm like, just leave me alone. I'm just passing through. And so she ended up going back into the brush where her cub was, and you can see the cub was there. It's not a very good photograph because the adrenaline in my system was still like, you know. And as she went that way, I quickly picked up everything and scooted across the drainage. I got to the other side, and she was right to where I was at that point. And I turned back, and all I could think was to say, Masicho, thank you greatly for letting me pass. And I had stood my ground, and she had protected her cubs. And so it was an instance that worked out well for both of us. After that, I was dropping down into the upper Colleen River in the Bush Range. And you can see there's still a lot of ice in the rivers. It was fun to walk on top of that because there are no mosquitoes. It was nice and cool and all that stuff. But crossing the rivers was always a challenge. And crossing the Colleen in this area, it took me a long time to walk up and down the banks to find the right spot to fjord that river, because you always want to cross the river where the river is bending away from you on the outside. So if you make it halfway through, you get swept up, it'll wash you to the inside of the next bend. So I finally crossed the Colleen, and there's Smoke crossing another tributary to the Sheenjack. He was just such a trooper. Now, you notice this little bell? That is not a bear bell. That is not for bears. Bears don't care about bells. That bell was for me to hear where he was behind me or around, and all that stuff. I got down towards, dropping down into the Sheenjack, and this is head towards Ebresberjohn Lake. And I wrote in my journal that night, I said, traveling through the mountains makes me feel alive. All parts and senses of my body working in unison to get me up, over, and across. Muscles unused in town awaken, stretch, and toughen. My strides are longer, my breathing more regular, my posture more erect. Awareness to my surroundings is heightened so that I'm more in tune and best able to judge the situation at hand and be prepared for anything that might arise. My life depends on this awareness and ability. To wander this land unaware could be my death. This is the Sheenjack River, another one of the tough river crossing. Believe me, the water is really cold. My camp was pretty simple. I would build fires out of twigs, a little pot, and this is how I made my meals. No camp stove, no nothing like that. One of my great rituals was Kalani Brothers Coffee sponsored me. They actually made a brand called the Pioneer Blend, and I think they called it the Explorer Blend now. And so they gave me a whole bunch of coffee that I could give out to the villages as well. But the whole thing is I take like 6 beans and grind them between 2 flat rocks and have stone ground coffee every morning. This is just going past Double Mountain, which is one of the tributaries to the Sheenjack River. And this was a memorable day, because as I got further up that valley, 10,000 caribou started coming down. And it was a narrow valley, and they just started coming down, and you could hear them grunting and snorting and ripping leaves and all this stuff. And they just kept coming and coming and coming. And I just stopped. And I set up camp, and I literally had to tie up Smoke because he wanted to go chase them. But I stopped, and all night, they kept coming. 10,000 caribou flowing past me, and I'd like to say I was a human rock in a river of caribou. And Aaron, that's where that Nuarno Arpuk comes from. At that moment, to feel alive, to take extravagant pleasure in being alive, to be in the moment, was so powerful. At the head of that valley, there's a selfie of me, and I wrote that same time in my journal. I feel sometimes like I've taken a trip of my own back in time, transported to an earlier day and age somewhere in our ancient past. With just what I carry on my back, I wander a world where the machinations of mankind are neither seen, heard, or felt. Were it not for this journal, I'd lose all sense of time and find myself adrift in an ancient land, far, far, far away from the maddening crowds. Well, at this point, I dropped down into the upper Chandeleur River, which was going to take me down to the village of Arctic Village. And I was hiking down that valley, and I was on the left side, and somewhere here, about this area, I was crossing a small creek, stepped on a boulder, the boulder rolled, and my ankle was snapped. And I'd sprained my ankle, and I could barely walk. I spent 3 days there, hobbling around. I built fish traps in the creek to catch grayling, so I'd have some food. And over the 3 days, I managed to build my SS Chandeleur, a raft. So I could float down the Chandeleur River to Arctic Village. Now, in my pack, I had carried 4 10-inch spikes, so I could pin the corners down. I had planned, just in case I needed to make a raft, I could build one. And so I built the SS Chandeleur and started floating down the river to Arctic Village. Well, I finally got to Arctic Village, and I spent several weeks there healing up my ankle, again, getting to know the Gwich'in culture. Wonderful. I spent a lot of time with Steve and Rose Lee at their cabin, and they finally took me across the Chandeleur River, and I was beginning to go my next trip. I still didn't know if I could complete my journey all the way to Kosovo. But I was up there, and I had supplies, and it was still, summer. And I thought, well, let's go to Anaktuvik Pass. Let's do the next leg of the journey and reevaluate. And I decided, well, let's give it a shot. And I remember getting on top of Misty Mountain, looking towards the west, across the Philip Smith Mountains. And Kosovo was 900 miles away. And I'm thinking, wow. But then I'm thinking, one day, 1 mile, 1 mountain pass at a time, and I could do this. But it was getting to be fall. The days were getting shorter. The sunsets were, more colorful. The temperature was beginning to drop. My camp was still pretty simple, just a tarp and all that stuff. I want to show the next picture. All the photographs, it was not always sunny, okay? Sometimes flash floods would come through. So there's the camp, and I needed to go, through this mountain pass here, and a flash flood came through, and I spent 2 days waiting that storm out. But eventually, there's that mountain pass. So here I am heading up. I have to go over this mountain pass. And it's about 3,500 foot elevation gain. And I still have like 80, 90 pounds on my back, So there's, get on top of that pass, looking back down to show some elevation. And there's the other side, and that's the notch that I came through to get to that side of the river. Well, I was approaching the Pipeline Haul Road, just south of Anakin Pass. And as I was descending the valley, I could smell petrochemicals. I was so used to being out there with, just the smell of nature and flowers and, all that stuff, but I could smell the diesel fumes and things like that from the haul road. But when I got onto the haul road itself, remember back then in '89, the haul road was closed to the public. There were gates, armed people, no public allowed. So all this garbage was through the pipeline companies, and it just sickened me to see this the way, again, back in the real world, the civilized world. And I could not get across that and past the pipeline fast enough. And I finally got into the gates of the Arctic National Park that Bob Marshall had written about. And Bob Marshall was a favorite mentor, historian or historic person of mine, because when I was in college, I was actually the president of the Bob Marshall Club. So this is a couple of series of slides. You see this mountain peak right here. There's the same peak there. I had to go up that valley that way, and there's, approaching that valley, there's this hidden little lake, and I'm going up these narrow little gorges, you know, to finally reach the pass, and there it is looking back down where I just came up from, and literally I had come from like over here, this way, this way, this way, you know, this is just the views that I had of being up there, and you know, it's just wild. It's it's raw. It's wild. It's wilderness, and it's beautiful, and it's tremendous. And there's so much to see. I mean, the geology, the contact zones, and all this stuff that you're hiking through and seeing the geology on it. And then I finally got to where I could see Mount Duderack, which is a famous peak in the gates of Arctic National Park. Well, beyond that, I was heading towards Anaktuvuk Pass, and I remember getting down, dropping down into this valley. It was not the one that leads to Anaktuvuk Pass. I had to go to the right and up and over another pass. But this day, I was hiking down this valley, and it dawned on me that I wasn't thinking. I wasn't looking at my feet. My peripheral vision took care of that. I didn't need a compass. I didn't need a map. The colors of the land told me which way to go. And I kind of crossed the threshold that I was moving through the country unaware. I was moving through the country as if I was a caribou, just following the flow of the land. And that's kind of looking back the other way. Well, I got to this point, getting Anaktuvuk Pass was down this valley and off there, and I just love this photograph of the caribou rack and all this stuff. And I wrote in my journal, eyes that were used to focus on close man-made objects now gaze upon and seek patterns in far-reaching and vast vistas. I've developed a 3-mile stare. And I could tell by the colors of the land, the amount of vegetation, where the game trails would be, where the best way to walk, miles ahead, because the patterns of the land, the geology met the hydrology, met the orientation and the vegetation, and all ties together into this system that I was finally plugged into. And it was a personal threshold that I realized, like I said, I was flowing through the land, not hiking through it. I wrote in my journal, it says, let's see if I can make sure I can get this right. Nope, no, I don't want that. Here's a, where did this go? Oh, nope. I can go back. I got, not letting me do this, okay, I might have to, oops. Sorry about this, not used to this system. Go back. Okay, and I wrote the calling. It says, I am now fully convinced that there is such a thing as a calling. For calls to me now, pulling and tugging at my awareness. It is a sublime call. I'm going to try to get rid of that and go here. Still not letting me get where I want to. Oops, nope. I'm sorry, I can't read all my notes. It says, okay, this year past has fine-tuned my awareness to it, to that call, and has taught me that it becomes louder and more demanding and insistent the further I am away from the wilds, and how it becomes soothing and calming when I'm within, and how it calls me constantly, calls me through my senses. I heard in the whisperings of the winds through the valleys, the murmurings of the water rushing towards the sea, and the plaintive cries of a lure echoing off of still waters of unnamed lake. That calling resonated with me. And a lot of people said, you know, why did you? I was doing something that I love. And again, this sense of Nuar taking extravagant pleasure in being alive in that moment. There's Anaktuvuk Pass, which is a really interesting village because as far as I know, It is the only native village in Alaska that is not on a navigable body of water. The only reason it was there because airplanes could land in that pass and became a trading post. So I spent several weeks there, again, had resupply there. Smoke got to play with the kids. He was the one that had to carry a backpack. I actually made some money flipping burgers at the local restaurant to make some money, while I was there. But again, the important thing was I was talking with the elders and learning about their culture as well. And in this village, the elders gave me the name of Peshukti, which is the man who walks. I neglected to mention that in Old Crow, way back at the beginning, the Gwich'in people gave me my Gwich'in name of Shirkai Cho. Shirkai meaning big foot or big feet, and Cho meaning big, Bigfoot. But they gave me my name. I was very honored about that. But I spent several weeks there and debating on what I could do. My next resupply point was going to be at Walker Lake Lodge, a lodge that had been there for a long, long time, and I had prearranged to have some supplies flown in there. And I decided, well, I'll go that. But when I left, the natives are all saying, when are you going to leave? Because it started to be winter. And I had 160 miles to go to Walker Lake, but luckily as I dropped down, I got below the snow line. And again, I always seem to be starting at around a full moon. Kind of weird that way. But this is just a wonderful country to hike through in the fall, hiking through that. This is Lonely Lake at the headwaters of Easter Creek. Just great country to hike through. Nice solid ground, not too many tussocks. Lots of company. If you want to go moose hunting, 4th of July Creek to go in the fall. There are a lot of moose there. And then this is heading down 4th of July Creek to the headwaters of the Kutuk River. Let's see if I can get this again. 4th of July Creek, and then Kutuk River starts back around there. My camp, again, still pretty simple, but I was in and out of the snows. And as I was going down the Kutuk Valley, this is the one that, there's a spot above that where I was walking down one side of the valley, and there's kind of a swampy area in the middle, and on the other side was a bear. And he was walking the same way. And by that time, I'd already had like 10 encounters, bear charges through the journey. And in my diary, I could say, I hate bears, I got charged today. And one time it's like, I doubly hate bears, I had 2 charges today. Well, I'm walking down, and here's this bear, and he's looking at me, I'm looking at him, and the valley's getting narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower. And I know sooner or later we're going to meet up. He's looking at me, I'm looking at him. And we got to the end of it, and I said, screw this. I threw off my pack and went, ah! And I ran at him, and he went, ah! So in my journal that night, I said, today I charged a grizzly. I said, I've been out there a long time, but he was a young male. You could tell by their shape and the way they move. An old bear will always come at you straight forward. Younger bears more at an angle. It's all about their behavior that you learn over time. But as I got to the bottom of the Kutuk, where it dumps into the Alatna River, there is this cache across the way. And this belonged to a cabin by Jim Schwarber. And this cabin was locked, but you could get into it. And on the table, there was a note saying, you're welcome to stay in my cabin. Just please treat it like you would your best friends. And I spent a couple of days there waiting for the weather to clear up in the Arrogance Peaks. But I found out about a year later, while I was doing my time at his cabin on the Alatna River, Jim Schwarber was in Hawaii studying business management. But the Alatna River, that's looking down the Alatna River, again, this is the Glacier Arctic National Park. And I was waiting for the weather to clear in the Arrogance Peaks so I could go up and over and through them. And I wrote in my journal that night, I woke early this morning in the pre-dawn darkness. All is silent except for the steady background rush of water as the Alatna spills over its own gravel bars. It's at times like this, when the whole world around me is at peace, and the promise of a new day is about to be fulfilled, that the realities of the other world, the so-called real world, are the most difficult to understand and comprehend. Later on, people will ask me about the hardships and difficulties that I faced on this journey. How can I politely explain that to me, The real hardships and difficulties of this world are not the bears or the bugs or the bogs that one encounters, but rather the stresses and dissatisfactions of an ill-lived life. And I knew I was out there fulfilling a dream. So there were no hardships, no difficulties, the bears and the bugs. That was just part of the experience. This is heading up Arrogance Creeks to the Arrogance Peaks. Had to go across them. There's smoke again, descending down to the Takahula River. Got to the headwaters of the Kobuk River and came across this moose. And I thought I'd be kind of cool, take a picture of the moose. So I started grunting, calling to it. And he finally came right up to me. And the thing is, I had to stand stock still for like 15 minutes until he finally forgot that I was there. I didn't want to have him charge me. The other thing I found out in the Kobuk River, because I was really close to Walker Lake, this is where a lot of people were hunting. And I came across this, an old fire pit. And it pissed me off. The mark of man in the wilderness. And I got so pissed off that I had to clean it up. And you can't just like throw that log in the river because it's got a charred end. And the charred end still says mark of man. So I built a big bonfire in the same place, spent the night there, and the next morning I reseeded it and erased that mark of the people who'd been there before. I felt like I needed to heal the land, to restore it, to put it back in balance. So the next day I got to Walker Lake, a lodge, and I dropped down the lodge and there was no one there. There was my canoe and supplies piled on the beach. The canoe was overturned with the supplies underneath. And taped to the bottom of the canoe was, "Have left for the winter, good luck." I was hoping like spend some time there, take a sauna, have a meal, and they're like, "Have left for the winter, good luck." I'm like, what am I going to do? I kind of started panicking. So I loaded everything in canoe and started paddling as fast as I could up to the end of Walker Lake. And I got to the end of Walker Lake, and I thought, what am I going to do? I could stay here at Walker Lake, or should I keep going? You know, all I have to do is take this canoe up and over one more mountain pass and canoe out the Noatak River. And I thought about it, I looked at my maps, and I thought, I don't know, but what's my PSR? What's my point of safe return? How far can I go before I have to decide either to come back to Walker Lake or loop around and go back to Jim Schwarber's cabin? And I studied it and thought, I was saying, well, Portage Creek, about 30 miles down the Noatak River, would be my point of safe return. So I started canoeing up the headwaters at the beginning of the Kalalook Creek, and there's me pulling up the thing. I had a lot of fun taking this picture. You can see the tripod right here, the shadow. But I could leave the canoe in the water and just stay there. Then I set up the camera, run to the canoe and take a picture. I had like 6 of them that didn't look good, but this one came out. So I started pulling up the Kalalook Creek, and this is where canoes normally just don't go, you know. And I kept going up and through the branches, and you know, just further and further up, and through it. Eventually, I got to where it was running out of the water, and I mean, this is where no canoe has gone before, you know. But this pass right here is called Akablua Pass, and that would take me to the headwaters of the Noatak River. But I was still several miles away that I now had to portage my canoe to the headwaters of the Noatak. So there's me trying to haul the canoe through the alders and brush and all that stuff, and finally got onto the hillside. And again, here's Akablua Pass. You can see all these landslides that come down off the mountain slopes. So my route was up and through and that way. And there's smoke pushing through it, but there was so much snow up there, it was difficult, really difficult walking. And I got up there to the top and dropped off a load of supplies, and I went back down to camp, and I said, I can't do this. I mean, there's too much snow, and it's probably going to snow some more. What am I going to do? So I spent a day, and I built some snowshoes. I hunted through the alders for the right curve and upturn. I took the bow line for my canoe, which is a 3-stranded polyethylene rope, and unbraided it, and used that to web the snowshoes, and I made myself a pair of snowshoes. And then I began to take the canoe up and over to Akablua Pass. And here's me, again, kind of fun, set the canoe, run around, take a picture, run around so the footsteps aren't in it. Smoke was not taking these pictures, I was. But here's looking down, you can see, actually, my camp was on this ridge. I had to take the canoe all the way up, and you can see the snowshoe trail here, looking back. And this is the next picture, is also looking back down. Here's one of those landslide debris fields of boulders were really horrible to walk through. And then you can see that the mountains are there. And the next picture is the mountains are way back there. And here's the landslides. And finally, it took me 3 loads to take everything up to the top of Acapulco Pass. Well, it just so happened that the day before I got there, I turned 31. And when I was growing up, everyone used to say, well, when you turn 30, you go over the hill. Well, when I turned 30, I went over 31 hills. But this was my 31st mountain pass on my 31st birthday. I got to the top of it. When I woke up the next day, the temperatures had dropped to 20 below. And that was not expected. It was a cold snap in early October. And I went, okay, well, let's go. And so I slid my canoe down and got down, and I could see the upper headwaters of Noatak, and I could see that the river was already kind of frozen, but there was some open water, and I'm thinking, well, if I could just get low enough in elevation, and this cold snap has got to go, because it's not supposed to be 20 below in early October, you know, I'll be able to do it. So I decided, and I had not reached my point of safe return. So got down onto the upper Noatak River, and started to pull my canoe like a sledge along the river, hoping to get into open water. Well, I got to Oyakak Mountain, and I was still just pulling my canoe through, but just past that, the river opened up. Like, yes, now I can hop in the canoe and just paddle like hell to get to Noatak. And you can see in the canoe, I have a whole bunch of firewood all there, because I needed that firewood, because there's very little wood in that country. And so Smoke and I were cruising down the Noatak River, racing, and, you know, just having a good time, and it looked like I could make it, you know, and we're just going up, but the river started getting narrower and narrower. The temperatures did not warm up. And eventually, it closed up. And getting out of these open leads is tricky, because the shelf ice is really thin. Twice, I fell through the ice, chest deep. And at 20 below, you don't have much time to live, but I had, again, firewood here in the bow of the canoe, that yellow dry bag. I had bundles of yellow dry ass plants for a quick start, and I'd have to spend 3 days at that spot collecting enough firewood, twigs, to build a fire to dry my clothes out, because I only had one spare pair. And if I fell in again and those weren't dry, I'd be dead. So I had to you know, spend extra time. But I was so hoping to make it out, and was able to get in and out of it. But at this point, I had passed my point of safe return. And now I was in a race against winter. And again, going down through these narrow leads of the Noatak River. And I saw amazing things, even though it was a really trippy experience. In my journals, out of bad experience comes good knowledge. Because I saw things that I never saw before. I saw rocks floating down the Noatak River. The water was so super cool that a rock at the bottom of the river would get ice crystals form around it. And more ice crystals, and more ice crystals, enough ice crystal, it would lift that rock up and start floating it down the river. You know, just amazing things like that. You look at like Yellowstone, the guy says we see all these circular pools of minerals, you know, and the ice would form those too. And it was, I said, even though I was still learning about the Arctic. And the thing that really helped me was this day, I was canoeing down, and I saw this jet black wolf on the left bank of the river. And there were 2 pups with it that I didn't photograph. And that night, I set up camp, and the wolves started to howl around me. I thought, this is really cool, you know. And under my tarp, and at this point, not only did I have a written journal, I had a micro cassette recorder with me. And I'm recording this microcassette, because I knew my mother was getting these microcassettes and she would transcribe them. She was a hell of a secretary. So I'm talking this microcassette. I'm like, yeah, it's been really tough. The river's really freezing up. I don't know how much longer. And all of a sudden you hear, there's a wolf. About 12 feet away, I saw two eyes bobbing in the distance. And they were up and down, left to right. And I knew the wolf was sniffing the air. And my fire was just down to a bed of coals. So I took some of the yellow dries and twigs that I had from my morning's fire, and I threw that onto the coals. Good fire. And fire keeps the wolves at bay, you know. As the flames grew up in the light, I could see this like 6 foot, 120-pound wolf. And the eyes just staring at me. My dog Smoke was tired, he was asleep. And I'm talking into my microcassette recorder. Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you. My shotgun's in the canoe, and that's 50 feet away. You know, how awesome is this? And the wolf kept closer, and he's sniffing around and sniffing. And the P cord that was holding my top to the brush, he started smelling the parachute cord. And then he started smelling the edge of the tarp, and he came up to the foot of my sleeping bag. To look into the eyes of a wolf, glowing luminescent green by the firelight, is an ancient interconnectedness, the essence of timelessness and wilderness. And to lock eyes with that wolf was incredible. And then he started moving again, and he started getting to where Smoke was. And I didn't know what would happen if Smoke jumped up, what he would happen. So instead of saying, hey, don't worry, all of a sudden I said, hey, that's close enough. And my tone of voice had changed. He shut up and took away, went off. Well, while I was recording my microcassette, it went click, end of side A. So I knew my mom would eventually get to the cassette. So I put in side B, and went, side B start. I said, just really, Mom, it's okay. But that and my children to have spent that few moments locked eyes with the wolf literally 4 foot away from me was incredible. And that sustained me, because after that the river really did freeze up. I was punching through overflow several times, really slogging, and eventually the river just completely froze up. And temperatures now drop down to 30 and 40 below. And at this point, I still had 120 miles to go to the nearest tree. And a tree line, I hoped there would be a cabin. That would be the most logical place to have a cabin on a major navigable body of water at the edge of tree lines. And I really was needing to get there, but I was running out of food. I was starving. And the wolves were also starving. I wanted to shoot ptarmigan, but the wolves were also being forced out by that early freeze up. And so they cleared the corridor of all the game. I wanted to shoot ptarmigan, but they had cleared it all out. And I was getting really, really worried. And I had frostbite on 6 fingers. I got caught in a storm, and I had frostbite on 6 fingers and 2 toes, and I was really in a super survival mode. And this is an artist from National Geographic that never got published. But I put 5 of these long arrows on the ice made out of willow branches saying, "And proceeding in this direction," in case anyone flew over looking for me, because I was way overdue. And long story short, well, the pilot who did eventually find me only saw 2 of those arrows out of 5 that I had put. So I really needed to get to tree line. And it got down to where I was eating a cup of rice mixed with a little bit of dog food and some Schilling's home-style gravy mix. Some days I could only walk a mile and a half. I remember one morning, I'd camp on the above the river on the bluffs, because all the cold air settles on the river, so I'd be a few degrees warmer up top. And I remember one morning coming down off the bluff, and I started heading down the river, and I'm just so tired. I plop down, and I'm exhausted. And I turn around, and I'd only been a couple of 100 yards from where I camped. The hardest thing was to pick up that pack and keep going. I had no choice. I had to. And I got to the point where I think I might have to eat my dog, but fortunately that never happened. I eventually got down to tree line. And I remember this morning very, very vividly. I got there the night before, and my survival depended on what I would find at tree line. If there was a cabin, if there was no cabin, well, I'd have to build a shelter, maybe kill a moose or something, or I don't know, but tree line meant survival. And I was so nervous that morning, I woke up, and instead of just going, I stalled. I started sewing at the tips of my gloves. I was so nervous about what I'd find that I didn't want to get there and not find anything, But I finally picked it up, and I remember, and this is in my journal, we started singing a song from Godspell, All Good Things Come from Heaven Above. And I got around this bend, to this bend, and an airplane flew over and landed. It was, after 16 days of survival, I was making it down to New Concrete, and Ron Sutton from the National Park Service had come looking for me. I was 54 days overdue. And they had not been looking for me for a long time. And during this point, I found out later on, after the journey was well over, my mom was calling Park Service saying, "Where's my son? Where's my son? He's out there. Go look for him. Go look for him." And they're like, "No, has he called you?" "No, he." So my partner who had quit back in Old Crow, his partner was the media contact for our Transverse Arctic expedition. So the Park Service called up Paul Lowe and said, "Do you know what Keith Nyitray is?" He said, "Well, as far as I know, he could be in Hawaii by now." And because of that, they didn't come looking for me. He almost killed me. He figured that if I didn't make it, then it justified that he didn't make it. And the amazing thing was, had a plane flown over me during that starvation period, I would have gotten on it and gotten out of there. Because frostbite, I had abscessed tooth as well. I was starving. Had a plane landed, I probably would have ended the expedition. But because he pulled that stunt, I made it. And about 2 years after the journey was over, he caught one of my slideshows. And he was in the audience, and I told him that. "You almost killed me, but because of that, I made it." So anyway, I got to New Cottonwood Creek. Ron Sutton said, "Yeah, there's a cabin there." I said, "Could you let the owner know that I need to stay there and heal up? And let my mom know if I'm alive." And so I walked in, and there was, at New Cottonwood Creek, Warren Thompson's cabin. This was taking several days after I got there. I remember getting to the cabin, and on the door, the window there's a latch on it. I opened up the latch, and I looked into the kitchen. There on the counter was a pack of Oreo cookies. And the cabin was open. It was propane heat and all that stuff. So I spent several weeks there. And I had to heal up the frostbite on both hands and also my feet. And I also had to do some dental surgery. I had an abscessed tooth in my lower left molar that was just excruciatingly painful. So it was so much pain. I finally took a pair of pliers and a sewing machine needle, and sterilized the sewing machine needle, and stood in front of a small mirror, and it took 3 tries to jab holes in my jaw to finally drain that abscess. But you're in so much pain, you will do anything to get rid of that pain. Well, I spent Thanksgiving there, and I ate, and I kept track of everything because I knew from prior experience going to other people's cabins in the bush that if you use anything, I kept track of how many Oreo cookies I ate, how many cans of tuna fish, boxes of rice-a-roni, how much propane, because I knew at some point I'd have to square up with the owner. And Warren Thompson did fly in, and right after Thanksgiving, he brought in some turkey and a pie, and he looked at my note on the counter of everything that I'd been using, and he said, "You're fine. Just square up when you get to Kotzebue." And the interesting thing that when I was there also, this was November, it was Thanksgiving, but in November of '89 is when there was a radio that I could listen to. And in November of '89 is when the Berlin Wall came down. And I heard that. As a counterpoint to Exxon Valdez oil spill in Tiananmen Square at the beginning of the trip, towards the end of the trip, I heard the Berlin Wall come down. And it was Thanksgiving, and I realized as a survivor, I had a lot to be thankful for. So I waited around till the moon came up again. It was now December, and I needed the moon and the moonlight to hike out. When I left Warren Thompson's cabin, I wrote in my journal, it's only 200 more miles to go. I said 200 more miles, but I had made it. I had made it to tree line. I had enough supplies, and I was prepared to walk out and sledge out, bargain toboggan from the cabin. And before my journey, I had been afraid of being caught above the Arctic Circle in the winter. I'd never been up there at temperatures 40, 50, 60 below. And yet, I saw the Arctic in a whole new light. The pastel colors, the stillness, the beauty of it. I mean, the sun doesn't come up, but you get these wonderful shades of salmon-colored sunsets and all this. And it's so cold, it's so still. If you stand there, you hear the snow creaking to the beat of your heartbeat as you rock back and forth. You can hear a moose walking on the ice a mile away. It's amazing how still and silent it is, but incredibly beautiful. Just incredible beautiful walking down. And towards the end of December, it was getting closer and closer to no attack, and this is right around winter solstice. And I remember riding this bed, and all of a sudden I came across a snow machine track. That means I was getting really close to no attack. And I could actually see some lights in the distance, and it looked like it was only like 5 or 6 miles away. But I forgot, in the Arctic, the air is so cold, it's so dense, it acts like a lens, and it bends light over the horizon. No attack was 20 miles away. But I walked in, I kept going all night long, and I walked into the village no attack, and they knew I was coming. So there was a big celebration. But the interesting thing is I walked in very late at night. And normally I would never enter a village at night, for a variety of reasons. But I walked in the village, and I was hoping they knew I was coming, you know. And I get into this part of the village, and I see a man walking down the street. I'm like, excuse me, can you tell me a good place to set up camp? And he looks at me, he looks at the dog and the toboggan, and he goes, well, most people camp down by the airport. Okay, thank you. And he goes, well, I'm like, crap. You know, and I walk a little further down, so you meet another person saying the same thing. Excuse me, you know, like, I'm here. You know, can you tell me a good place to camp? He goes, well, most people camp down by the airport. I'm like, crap, okay, so I'll camp down by the airport. Tomorrow, I'm here. Well, all of a sudden, all over town, the lights started coming in, snow machines started revving up. The first guy went into his cabin and said, you wouldn't believe what I just saw. There's some white guy there, a dog. And they knew that this man from Canada was coming here. And they all have CB radios in their cabins. And they said, he's here! And they just piled out a big introduction, and they put on this huge feed, and they invited me to spend the holidays through Christmas and New Year's with them in the village of Notak. And it was just an incredible celebration. Playing a lot of the Eskimo Olympics there, where the whole village gets it, and gifts are being given out. Everyone in the village plays finger pulls. I played finger pulls. You know, I actually made 2 points for my team. And seal hops and nil hops and all sorts of other games. But there are all these gifts being exchanged as well. And I didn't realize it, but for several days, young men in the village would come up and stand next to me and then walk away. Well, one of the gifts, they were sending these young, they gave me a whole set of new clothes. They were sending men to judge my size. So new pants and a sweat, you know, and so that was gifts. The oldest man in the village gave me a roll of toilet paper, which after using snow for several months was really nice. So I stayed there till about January 6th, and it was finally time for me to head out. And so here I am, leaving the village of Noatak. I only had 60 more miles to go to the city of Kotzebue, and I was no longer in the wilderness. There's snow machine trails, and people would snow machine behind me. And, they gave me my name of Prashruti, Walking Man. The kids call me Walkman. But they say, look, man, you want to ride? I'm like, no. They're like, we could be there in 20 minutes. I'm like, I'll be there in 2 days. And this was my walking out. And I finally got to the shores of the Chukchi Sea on January 10th. And it was over, you know? And I could see the lights of Kotzebue away, and the airport lights. And this was my return to the 20th century, to the civilized world. And I was torn in two. I was drawn to those lights, but I didn't want my journey to end, you know? And the stars up, here's Orion. I love the colors that you see in that clear air. And in my journal, I wrote, being my last night on the trail, it's hard not to reflect on all that I've experienced. I've known much solitude on this journey, but what truths have I found in the silence of the wilderness? I found that one's dreams are worth pursuing, and when done so with patience, perseverance, and the hope and optimism out of which those dreams arise, they can and will come true. That it's important to believe in ourselves and believe in our dreams. I found that in silence one comes to know oneself. By divesting ourselves of the general mayhem of the modern world, we can once more hear and learn to listen to that guiding voice within us all. By seeking that silence in nature, not only will we learn about ourselves, but of the patterns of peace as well. There are other treasures and truths I found, many as yet I can't put into words. Others, I think, are best and most meaningful only to those who find them for themselves. If one is interested in what these may be, then seek those silences for yourself. For as long as we have wilderness to experience, they will be there. Masi Cho. Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, we have some time before we have to get out of here. If there are any questions, I'll be more than willing to try to answer them. Yes. This is yes.
How many pairs of boots and shoes did you have? Did you wear them all
Well, let's see. I had the winter boots on the dog sled portion. I used sneakers. That I got a pair of size 12 sneakers in Old Crow that took me all the way to Walker Lake. Just sneakers. And then at Walker Lake, I had another pair of winter boots. So basically 3 pairs of boots.
How did you organize feeding the dog? How did that go?
Organized feeding the dog? Well, I mean, Eagle Pet Food was one of my sponsors, so I had lots of good dog food. And again, he just carried that in his backpack, and he'd eat out of that. And after a while, I put more of my stuff in his pack. But yeah, he had his own rations up until the very end, when it was starvation. And here I am, I have rice and gravy mix, and I'm looking at his dog food. It's like 30-20, 30% protein, 20% fat. I said, my dog's eating better than I am. You know, that's when I started taking the dog food, boiling it, making a slush, and putting it with rice and the home salad gravy mix, and we'd share that. But yeah, so yeah, I ate dog food for a while, but it was 30% protein and 20% fat. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. How long did it take from Oak Crow to Kotzebue? I mean, how long did it take you to walk?
From Oak Crow, let's see, I left there in early June, so 6 months. Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you all for coming. I appreciate this. And again, this was a fundraiser for the Sitka Maritime Heritage Society. Hopefully you'll donate enough so they can hire me again next year. Thank you all.